Hey friends, Pastor Jack here. What I'd like to do is, I'd like to tell you the first of 3 stories that I often tell when I'm talking with churches about the criticality and necessity of change. Now, I think that for most of us who are part of local churches or who lead local churches, we're aware that things are different now that we're moving into the 21st century. We've had COVID, we've had massive political polarization, we've had all kinds of issues throughout our world and our own culture that are making us feel like there are these seismic shifts going on under the surface, and oftentimes we have a difficult time making sense of them. So I've come up with this way of telling 3 stories to create 3 separate metaphors to talk about the kind of change that we are experiencing, the ways we need to think as church leaders, and some practical, tangible takeaways to help churches and church leaders to start to think about things that they might need to do to begin to plan for the future. So I'd like to tell you the first of those 3 stories. This is called Dinosaur to Wolf Pack. Now you'll see a graphic up on your screen that will walk you through some of the basics of what we're going to talk about. But the idea here is that we all love dinosaurs. However many hundreds or thousands or millions of years later after they've been done and gone from the planet Earth, we are still fascinated by dinosaurs. We film movies like Jurassic Park. We have entire groups of scientists that specialize just in the study of dinosaurs. We speculate about what they might have been like and how big or small or whether they were warm-blooded or cold-blooded. I mean, we've got entire fields of study dedicated to dinosaurs, and there's a reason for that. Dinosaurs are cool. Dinosaurs are things that we don't have anything like in our modern day, unless you count things like sharks and crocodiles. But for the most part, there's a reason why we look at these things called thunder lizards, which is what the word dinosaur really means, and we dig them. And here's some things that you should note about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were big. Sure, there were smaller varieties, but the ones that really captivate our attention, things like T-Rex and Brachiosaur, they were big, man. They left big footprints. I mean, when they stepped, I would imagine that the ground shook. You know what? They laid eggs that gave, like they hatched, right? And like it was kind of these like reptilian sort of things where like the young would be instinctually and instinctively programmed for self-sustaining and survival from the moment that they hatched. They ate massive amounts of food. I was reading one particular website where a paleobotanist speculated that a brachiosaur probably had to eat somewhere between 400 and 900 pounds of swamp foliage every day just to keep its heart beating. I mean, crazy. Because they were so large, they oftentimes moved very slowly. Now sure, you get some that were smaller that had turbocharged engines like velociraptors or other things like that, but by and large, when we see these big ones, most people would speculate that they were not too fast. They would move slowly. On top of that, most people don't think they were too smart either. I remember as a child, I loved the stegosaur, right? It was this big quadruped dinosaur. It had big spikes on its tail and big armored shields that rose up from its back, but it had this really small head. And because of the way that the bones and the skeletons looked, a lot of paleontologists speculated that the stegosaur actually had 2 brains. One in its head and one kind of about midway back, so that it actually had like a rear seat driver and a front seat driver, almost like on a fire truck or something like that. So most people would say that for all of their amazingness, they probably weren't too smart. And we all know that they weren't very adaptive to change. Why? Because we don't have any of them anymore. Whether you believe that an asteroid hit the planet or there was an ice age or something else that wiped them out, the reality is that dinosaurs did not do that great of a job adjusting or adapting to new environments and to new climates as they began to change around them. Now again, for a lot of those things, we don't really care. They're still really cool. And the thing is we still study them even today, but the problem is that there are really only 2 things left over from the dinosaurs. The first is their bones, right? We're still digging them up, still finding them, still assembling them in museums and speculating what the rest of them might have looked like. And they also left their fuel. It's funny, but we all drive our cars all around the world every day on the residual biodegradable matter from the dinosaurs. So we basically have their bones and their fuel, and that's really all we have left of the dinosaurs. Now, the interesting thing about that for me is there's a lot of parallels between dinosaurs and our current model of church, particularly the megachurch model, but really any form of attractional, large-scale, come-and-see kind of church will do. The thing you'll notice is we like to focus on things like big attendance, right? We want to see lots of people. We want to see thousands of people gathered together doing things like prayer and worship and things like that. They're big. You know a church is healthy when it's a big church, right? We like big buildings. We like big programs. We like big staff. Man, we like the idea that when a church puts its foot down in a local community, the entire community quakes with the weight and the footprint of that church, right? We like it like that. And it makes sense to us. We don't lay eggs, but we do church plants that oftentimes are a lot like that, right? So instead of laying an egg and just hoping that the little baby makes it, we do kind of the same thing when we say, hey, we're going to give you a dedicated budget for 3 years. We're going to give you a pastoral staff team and a detachment of between 30 and 150 people from this church. We're going to drop you over here in this particular area. We hope you make it. Call us if you don't, or call us if you have trouble. We'll do what we can if we can. It is a little bit like that. We do have big budgets. See, just like dinosaurs having to consume 400 to 900 pounds of swamp foliage a day, here at Trinity Church even, we need somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $2.6 million a year just to keep the lights on, the staff paid, and the doors open. We have and we need big budgets, big resources. And here's the thing. We're also bureaucracy heavy. We tend to have multiple layers of decision making. Like a lot of churches, there might be boards or presbyteries or structures of clergy and lay leadership, and they have all of these different structures that make things kind of slow as a general tendency. And on top of that, that makes us generally not very responsive when things change around us. Like, if just because you have this issue doesn't mean you can respond on a dime. It's got to go through all these different committees. It's got to go through all of these different people. There needs to be processes of prayer and discernment and thinking. And a lot of times those are really good because it prevents one person from having too much power or too many of the decision-making capabilities. But it does tend to slow things down. It tends to complicate things. It tends to make them so that, as a general rule, local churches are not what most people think of when they think of nimble, agile, rapid response organisms, right? We do also tend to like things to be traditional. We love the idea that things are rooted in history and tradition. We like the old ways of doing things. We just do. Even when things are done in a new way, we like for them to have tethers to the old. And that oftentimes has really good connotations to it. The truth is we like things to be glitzy. We like people to be able to say, yeah, I go to that church across town. And everybody goes, oh, yeah, whoa, yeah, I know that church very well. We like our buildings. We spend millions of dollars on our buildings. But here's the thing, guys. You can probably see where I'm going with this. Just like the dinosaurs, whom all we have left is their bones and their fuel, we are moving rapidly to a place where the only thing that's going to be left in our culture of our churches is our buildings and our Judeo-Christian ethic. The buildings are like the bones. I know for a fact that there are real estate agents that are struggling to figure out what to do with church buildings when the churches close. What do you do with them? Do you turn them into bars, apartment complexes? Like, what do you do with these buildings when suddenly no one is there? Western and Eastern Europe are dotted with gigantic buildings that once housed vibrant signs of life, the white-hot cutting edge of the gospel. And now there's 4 little old people that meet there on a Sunday and 1,000 tourists that come through in a year, right? The only thing that's left of those churches is their bones. And the only thing left that our culture knows of those churches, and increasingly even of our own, is this sort of loose Judeo-Christian ethic where people acknowledge it's probably not a good idea to steal. Why? I don't know, it just doesn't feel like the right thing to do. Probably not a good idea to commit adultery or to murder. Why? Because it's against the law? Yeah, but there's just something I remember my grandmother telling me. Like, there's this residual Judeo-Christian ethic that still is part of our culture in many churches around the world. But really, increasingly, that's about all that's going to be left. The bones of our buildings and our Judeo-Christian ethic. And I think we can all see those days rapidly approaching. And why? Well, because the temperature is dropping, friends. See, just like the dinosaurs, the temperature is dropping. There's this spiritual ice age that is sort of impending. And all of the canaries in the coal mine, most of the early warning systems, most of the missiologists and the sociologists would tell you that that is true. See, the drop in church attendance across the board is just the beginning. See, a lot of churches would tell you, well, our attendance isn't dropping. We're growing, in fact. And I would say, no, you're not. Statistically, across the United States, there might be small churches that are growing by conversion growth, but the vast majority of churches are swelling, not growing. That means as churches are closing down, they go somewhere. The people that are there tend to flock toward larger expressions of church. So what a lot of pastors think is growth is actually just swelling. If I broke my arm and my arm swelled up because all the blood rushed to that part of my body, there's not a single person that would look at my arm and go, hey, nice job, Jack. That's looking good. Like everybody would be like, oh my gosh, what is a problem? What is going on? And that is what's true. Did you know that most churches in the United States report less than a 3% growth rate from conversion? Most of our churches are not leading people to Jesus. You know what's funny? Even if you talk to the average person on a church staff, if you pull any person aside and say, when in the last 2 years have you led someone to Christ? You might get an answer like once or twice. The vast majority of people would say, I haven't. And if that's true of our staffs, our elder boards, our deacon boards, different groups of people that are high bought in terms of leadership, what do we think is true of the average person that attends a local church? When was the last time they led someone to Jesus? Do you know of people meeting Jesus at a rate that is commensurate with the necessary growth? You see, it's not happening. In fact, the largest and fastest growing group of people from a religious point of view here in the United States is what are called the nuns and the duns. And a lot of people speculate that by 2032, the largest group of people philosophically in the United States will be people with no religious affiliation, the nuns, or who used to have one and have abandoned it. They are done with it, the nuns and the duns. And if you follow those curves forward, a lot of people would tell you that within another 10 to 15 years, those people, the nuns and the duns, will not only outnumber Protestants, Catholics, Buddhists, or other expressions, but will be larger than all of those other expressions combined. Temperature's dropping, friends. In addition to that, philanthropic giving is becoming harder and harder to come by. See, when I was a kid, if you wanted to do something philanthropic with your giving dollars, you had a couple of options. You could give to the March of Dimes, you could give to the United Way. There might be another organization or two that you might have heard of, but really, the thing most people did is they gave to their local church. And they trusted that their local church was going to utilize those funds to make a difference in the community around them. But now, everyone that I know has a not-for-profit. They have something that they're trying to ask and network their friends to be able to give toward. My mom is on staff with a not-for-profit that provides free medical care. My neighbor is on staff with an organization that provides free medical care, and it's not even Christian-based. Like, there are friends that provide everything from free car repair, just like our ministry called Gear here at Trinity Church. There are people that work with specific kinds of AIDS orphans in Africa. Like, there are so many different ways that people can distribute their philanthropic giving, that the idea of centralizing it at a local church, it just doesn't occur to people anymore. And so as a result, local churches are beginning to gasp for breath as the air and the philanthropic oxygen is being sucked out of the room. And it's not just one church's problem. Churches all across the country, and indeed all across the world, are starting to notice the temperature is dropping, the air is getting thin. On top of that, the proliferation of social issues is just causing us to feel like we are being overwhelmed. Things are happening faster than we can possibly solve or address them. Every time we try to solve an issue, well, tell me your stance on this issue. As soon as we actually get together to figure out and to discern and to pray through what is the Spirit of God telling us about this issue, by the time we actually produce a statement, the issue itself has morphed into 5 other issues. It's impossible and increasingly difficult for us to try to keep pace with the number of issues that are popping up in our culture that we have to deal with. And because we are slow moving, we're not very well equipped to be able to do so. In addition to that, there are increasingly new evidences of persecution. People are actually losing their jobs because they will refuse to take a stand on a particular issue in order to conform with what their workplace requires. And again, some of those kinds of things may actually be good, but they are beginning to bump up against our faith. And I just would expect that, as people like Rod Dreher would point out in his book, The Benedict Option, that's just going to continue. In addition, there is social polarization, political division. There's all of this infighting on every possible side that's tearing at the fabric of not only our culture at large, but also us who are Christ followers. The radical increases of things like secularism, paganism, and all of these other things that are competing for the faith and the commitment of all of the people around us, it's just resulting in the fact that we here in local churches, we are beginning to sense that the temperature is dropping. And despite our hope that maybe it'll warm up, maybe spring will kick in, maybe summer will return, most people, theologians, missiologists, sociologists in general, would tell you it's probably not likely to do so. This is just going to become the new normal. And if we do not figure out how to function in an increasingly Arctic world, then we probably won't make it very much longer. So, what kinds of things do function well? When the temperature drops, when the spiritual ice age begins to set in, what kinds of things work? What kinds of things function in that kind of an environment? Because I would tell you that if local churches right now in their current form are more like dinosaurs, then they really only have three options. Option one would be, well, you know what? We don't really want to have to try to figure out what would survive in the Arctic. We've probably got maybe 5, maybe 10 years left. We'd rather just find as many places with swamp foliage as we can, eat as much of it as we can, and then we're okay with a graceful, dignified death. And I would tell you, there are a lot of churches that will choose that option. And honestly, for some churches, that may be the best thing for them to do. I remember I had a friend who was a pastor who said, listen, Jack, most of the people in my congregation, they've already fought their wars. They've already charged their hills. Like, they've already done all of those things. The last thing that they want to do right now is for me to come to them and tell them that we're going to have to morph or change or evolve or do something crazy. Really, honestly, I understand what you're talking about, but it would really just be better for the people that I lead for us to just sort of hold position where we are, enjoy the twilight of the remaining of our days, and then we'll close our doors. And we'll be bones and Judeo-Christian ethic. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm so glad I don't want to be in part of your church, but he was just being really honest. And there will be other churches, just like dinosaurs, that choose that. There will be other churches who say, we will make the leap. Whatever it costs, whatever it requires of us, however many people we lose, whatever form it might take, we will make the leap. We are committed to it. We will grow whatever is necessary. We'll abandon whatever's we will make the leap and we will move into the remainder of the 21st century, even if it means that we will look completely different than the dinosaur we're starting out as. There will be churches who do that. And then there will be churches who say, listen, we're not content staying where we are and we're not sure if we can make the leap. We may die somewhere in the mountains trying to be able to make that change, but we are committed to at least trying. And I think every church is going to have to be confronted with those three options. Do you want to just stay where you are and recognize that you're committing yourself to a slow but hopefully graceful death? Do you want to commit yourself to everything that is required to make the leap through the mountains, to change and to grow whatever is necessary, to look like whatever functions best in an Arctic environment? Or maybe you're not sure whether you can, but you're willing to try, even if it means you die somewhere in the mountains. Better that than to have stayed in the desert where you could be more comfortable. So let's talk a little bit about, for those churches that are willing to move beyond the desert and say either I'm committed to whatever it takes or we're at least willing to give it a try. What are the kinds of things that are going to move forward from there and probably be more survivable into the 21st century? Now, to stick with the metaphor, I want to talk to you a little bit about the idea of wolves. Wolves are not dinosaurs. They're very, very different from dinosaurs, but they are way better suited for environments like the Arctic. You'll notice, first of all, that wolves are smaller. The average Arctic wolf weighs about 100 pounds. A T-Rex probably weighed somewhere around 11,000 to 15,000 pounds. Wolves are definitively smaller. They are also hungrier. meaning they scent, they track, they are more aggressive, they're more agile, they are in need of more regular food supplies, they have a daily calorie allotment, and they are aggressive about pursuing it. They tend to be leaner. They'll be able to consume a much wider range of things for their diet, and they will need fewer calories to stay alive as a result. They are actually smarter. Because wolves are mammals, they are capable of tracking, hunting, partnering, outsmarting, waiting, playing, engaging, and remembering a wider range of things that they can apply to their advantage in their context. They are communicative. They howl, they smell, they communicate. If something is too big for one wolf or for one wolf pack to take down on its own, they can howl to call for help. And they do that a lot. I remember in 2010, I had the chance to go to Romania, and I was working with some church planters in Hungary. I took a couple days to dip down into Romania for fun. And I remember I went to Bran Castle, if you've ever been to Bran Castle, beautiful castle in Romania. And I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to go have my quiet time, kind of up on top of this hill that overlooks Bran Castle. It's just out in the forest. And I remember it was really fun. I was sitting there and I was praying and I'm reading my Bible. And then over my right shoulder, I hear this howl. And I was like, time to go. You know why? Because it was only one wolf howling. But there's never just one wolf, right? Wolves howl because if they're alone, they won't be for very long. And very often, they're not alone. There's going to be 2, and then there's going to be 10, and then there's going to be 20. And then if the target is big enough, there's going to be 50. And wolves are scary, not just because they by themselves are dangerous, but because there's usually never just one, right? The next is that they are both centralized and decentralized. They do operate alone, but they also operate in families. They operate in packs. They can even operate in mega packs when the situation calls for it. Then they are able to benefit collectively, and once they have benefited collectively, they disperse back to their own dens and their own territories. Wolves are warmer. They are warm-blooded. They can stay alive in the cold longer. They're affectionate with one another and with their young. They are playful. They're hospitable. They are nurturing to their cubs. To that point, they give birth to live young. They don't lay eggs and hope that they work. Wolves take care of their young until they are able to take care of themselves, not merely hatching them and hoping that they can do that. In fact, they nurture and then release their young in a way that helps them to go and build packs of their own, continuing to engage those packs over time as it is beneficial, not trying to control them or dominate them. And finally, wolves are communal. They depend on each other. They communicate with each other in ways where they are highly relational. And most people would say that most dinosaurs were loners, right? And if they gathered together in herds, they may not have been very relational, but wolves are. Those are the kinds of organisms that are capable of surviving in the prolonged cold. And there are a lot of parallels, I think, for what we're going to be needing to move toward if we're going to be 21st century churches that survive the impending spiritual ice age, and they look very similar. You see, just like wolves, we're probably going to have to get smaller. Now, I don't mean that we don't still have a connection to each other or that we don't ever gather together in bigger environments to celebrate and worship, but we are probably going to have to get smaller into these distributed households, smaller networks built around neighborhoods and needs that kind of group us together for the purpose of mutual and beneficial integration. We are going to have to get hungrier. We're going to have to become more missional, more kingdom evangelistic. It's not about growing the beast, but about continually taking territory for the kingdom of the living God, house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, life to life. One of the things that's true about 21st century churches is they will become more aggressively missional. They'll become leaner. They'll be more financially efficient, more self-sustaining, more bivocational, more diverse in terms of income streams. Wouldn't surprise me at all if 21st century churches have figured out how to do things like have foundations, where they have endowments, where they own businesses directly or indirectly that actually support their bottom line. Wouldn't it be cool if I could come to you and say, hey, listen, you and your wife really should give financially to be part of the kingdom of God, because it is about the submission and the sacrifice of every area of our lives to the lordship of Jesus. And if you want to give to Compassion International or to other things like that, that's great. But here's the thing. If you give here, 100% of what you give goes right out the door to impact our community and our world. Because we own businesses, we have other initiatives that keep our doors open, our lights on, and our staff paid. That'd be really cool, wouldn't it? That wouldn't allow people anymore to say, well, the church is just after your money. Be like, look, we don't need your money. And if you want to give someplace else, you can, but the best bang for your buck is going to be right here with us. We're going to have to get smarter. We're going to have to leverage technology, diversity, autonomy, and ownership to build temporary or permanent partnerships for mutual benefit. We're going to have less territorialism and greater cooperation, just like wolves. See, wolves have different and distinct packs, but when there's a moose to take down and one pack howls, all the other packs show up to cooperate. They all eat their fill, and then they all go back to their places, and they integrate. They do communicate. We must also. We're going to have to be able to be part of networks that communicate with other networks to highlight needs, request help, and pool resources around common and agreed upon objectives. When another church howls, other churches will have to show up. And we'll want to. We will have this sense of decentralized and centralized. Yep, like I said, there will be times when all the packs will come together to celebrate and to benefit. But that may happen once a month, maybe once a quarter or otherwise. May have a variety of expressions in various locations rather than always coming to a dedicated building or services that always look the same way. Now, we're also going to have to get warmer. 21st century churches will be relationally warmer. More grassroots, less staff dependent. They're going to foster biblical hospitality and encourage people to do the same through continual cycles of invitation and relationship and mission. We're going to have to give birth to live young, friends. 21st century churches will be massively disciple-making oriented, and will be focusing deeply on nurturing new believers, new Christians, and newcomers into deeply relational processes of disciple-making that are engineered to teach them to grow and then to go and do so likewise themselves. And they are going to be replication-oriented. 21st century churches will be built by necessity around the idea of replication. They may get large. Some people may be good at leading 50, 500, or 5,000, but they will likely be in collections of smaller communities and wolf packs that come together, release back to their own contexts, and then take more territory on their own. There will likely still be dinosaurs in our landscape for the next 5 to 10 years, probably conservatively, maybe even longer. But eventually, the ice age will find them, friends. Not every church will be able to make the leap from dinosaur to wolf, so the options for each church remain. Want to die in the desert? Do you want to commit yourself to making the leap to growing fur and fangs and all the things that are true of wolves and wolf packs? Or are you at least willing to try to make the journey or die trying? And that, my friends, is what I mean when I talk about we have to move from dinosaur to wolf pack.